I need to make this video because it's very important. It's going to help my mother, private investigators, anyone that's involved. It's sort of in a desperation to help my family because there's so much corruption, tragedy that, obviously everything that's happened with Patricia Cadena, my brother Frankie, them abusing my mother. And you're not going to believe, I don't think, there's only one way to figure this out, to validate this, if this is true or not, is you're going to have to ask the individual. And maybe there's another way. I'm sure you maybe not going to have to ask the person. This is going to scare my immediate family. This is going to scare, okay? When I was playing on the soccer field, and my dad used to take me to the McKinney, no, it was not McKinney, it's on Valwood. It's not Tedpole Middle School. It's a middle school. Vivian Field, I think it's called. Vivian Field Middle School, I think it's called. It's over by Valwood. And I used to play nearly all my soccer games there with Frankie, okay? Frankie played the soccer field next to me, and I played on the younger division, okay? And one day, I remember walking on that soccer field, and I'm not sure. I mean, it kind of scares me in my memory of being able to see the visual of this person and identify him. And I saw Mike Standish. And you got to keep in mind, every time you go to a soccer game, you're always familiar with the people the parents and the people that show up in the bleachers. And I remember walking on the soccer field, and he was waiting for me. And he very specifically looked over at me, waiting. And I don't know if my dad was coming out, because my dad nearly almost every single game, he waited on the bleachers and would watch me play soccer, including Frankie. So, he'd watch me play soccer a little bit, and he'd go watch Frankie during night games. But this was during the day. And it wasn't often that me and Frankie had games at the same time. But this was during the day. I want to say it was an afternoon game, maybe late morning. And I was walking on that field, and it was the primary soccer field I used to play. And I saw Mike Standish on that, and he was looking, and it was a younger version of himself. And he looked right at me, and he just these piercing, I got scared, because I remember he was just like this, and it was very unusual for an adult, especially when a kid who was totally random to look at me. Obviously there's a lot of racism. I don't know why, but I remember, because Mike Standish is a pretty large person. He looks extremely athletically built. He's 6'4", 6'3", skinny, and that's very hard. It's not very common in sort of a healthy build. And he just looks at me, and he had this beady eyes, but he was kind of crazy a little bit. And I remember just looking and then eyeballing him back, and then I kind of got scared, I remember what the fuck, and I don't know who this person was, and I sort of remember just going about my business. And I remember as soon as he saw me, I got scared, he looks over and and I want to say he nodded his head, and he goes, and he does this. And I don't know if he was signaling to somebody or he was thinking to himself. There wasn't very many people in the bleachers. There was probably no more than 10 people. And I went about my business. Now, keep in mind that the fact that this celebrity stuff with Michael Jackson has already happened. Who now wants to get involved? And one of the reasons that I think that Johnny, this, I talked about that I went to this very $1 million house, expensive $1 million house with my aunt, my mother's sister Johnny. And I remember very clearly going into this house. It was just two married couple. I think they were married, or there were a couple. I want to say they were married, and it was one child. And I talked about this one child that was partially blind, had like had a playroom and a room, and it was like all, you know, princessed out, like just, you know, every little girl's dream, right? And the walls were pink. And I talked about that when I walked into, I was just looking at the house, like, wow, I've never been in a house like this. Is, you know, everything was whatever best money can buy. And it was weird because I remember going into Joni's car. Joni's car, I believe, was silver, and it was like it was kind of built like my Plymouth Laser. And it had like a muffler, but it was like a old, like you could tell the car was from the ghettos and the poor, you know, like this wasn't. And one of the things, the reason I asked Johnny, I remember this very distinctly. The reason I asked Johnny, I remember being in the kitchen, and I asked what this guy's name was and who lived there, was because who is kind enough to allow someone of a Mexican family, and of all the people that you can hire, of all the money you have, you want to hire a poor Mexican woman who obviously is from Mexico, and you could probably tell that, would hire them to specifically work with a little blind girl. Because I talked about that. I remember going on my knees, and I walked into the room, and the room carpet was like, it was like 5 layers of just padding. I mean, it was just like walking on clouds or something. And I was like, dang, I've never been any place that had this sort of luxury, you know, for anybody. And I was like, wow, I was like, this carpet is, and I remember being on my knees, and I talked about that. I looked at the wall over which, you know, it was a few feet from the entrance to the door, and immediately thinking of my sister. I think immediately thinking, and I remember looking and just zoning in that, why is this girl watching? Am I watching her throw up in her own filth? And why do human beings do that? Why? I remember that very distinctly, and I remember not knowing this was my sister. I remember just thinking and looking as I just then put my attention away from this girl's room, because nobody was in the house. They were on vacation, and it was me. I want to say Julian was there. I don't know if Frankie was. I don't think Frankie was. Me, Julian, Johnny, and I want to say Ceci. Maybe Lupe, but it was me, Ceci, Johnny, Julian, and me and Julian. So Julian, I think, was too young to remember. He might remember. He'd be able to tell you. But I remember after walking, and I talked about it was just like, it was massive, and they had a pool house in the back. And that's like, she didn't, I was walking around, and I was kind of, you know, and I was probably in the house total for maybe an hour. So I'm walking in the kitchen before we leave, like 15, 20 minutes before we leave. And I said, I don't know if I asked him, so what do they do for how does somebody get so much money to earn something like this? And I don't know. She said she didn't know. They were kind of private people. I don't remember her telling me. And I remember this very distinctively. There's no way to prove this. I believe there was hidden cameras in there and probably recording devices. There had to have been. Why would you let a poor Mexican family into a $10 million house to just roam around for free? We could be just stealing your shit. Like, even if you thought we could get away, like, you could potentially take your riches away or something. Like, you have too much money. And I just remember being in the kitchen. I was, Johnny was over the other side of the counter, and Ceci was there, and I don't know what they were doing, and Johnny was kind of like maybe getting mail or something like that. And I said, what is this guy's name? And the reason I say Mike, was because I remember thinking, what is a rich person's name? Is there a specific way a person is named that God gives people that is rich? Like, and she said, "Oh, Mike." Like, or I went. The reason I remember because the syllable was very short. The word was just like, "Oh, Mike." Like it's a simple name. Like Mike just owns a $10 billion house. Like Mike. And she said Peggy, and the reason I think I said she said Peggy because I thought like Peggy kind of goes along with pig, peg, Peggy, peg. Like who owns a house that's called named Peggy with a $10 million house? Like, and I remember that, and the reason I asked, main reason I asked, because I wanted to know who was willing enough to hire a Mexican family that were from Mexico to come in here and bring their kids here. Like who was willing to? And I don't know Frankie. Frankie could have been in that house before. Because I know that there was another time I think she asked me to go to the house again if I wanted to just come along with her. And I wasn't available or something because otherwise I would have. But Julian could tell you, or Frankie could tell you, Ceci could tell you, Joni could tell you. But Joni only worked there for like a few months. And I asked Joni how much they paid her, and they didn't pay her shit. She said that she didn't. She goes, "They pay you really well." She goes, "No, they don't. They pay okay. They don't pay all that great. They don't pay nothing at all." She kept on saying that their owners were very stingy. No, la gente que vive aquí son muy stingy. Están muy ganados de dinero, real stingy. And it's a word that was always used in my family of people that had a lot of money that don't want to spend money on other people. And she wasn't getting paid very much, and it was one of the reasons she left, because they weren't paying her hardly anything. Whatever it was during that wage, it wasn't enough to how much probably she thought she deserved and how much money they had. I don't know. But Joni directly worked with this little blind girl. She was like somewhere around 11 or 12. She was about my age, close to my age. And I remember asking Joni because I wanted to know what is the names of these people so that I could thank them that they gave him an opportunity. If I ever think like, because I was thinking like, what kind of name, what kind of person's name would allow us to be here? Like this is a white person's house, you know, like this is white royalty. We're driving in a cheap car, and I remember it being like. Sort of like in Seattle, Washington, where it's kind of rainy, the ground is wet. It was kind of sprinkling rain, but it was like sprinkling a little bit. But I was wanting to know, you know, whose name these people were that would hire my aunt to work, to give an opportunity to work in a house like this with a daughter and to basically get paid to do very easy work. And I just remember that. It was Peggy and Mike, but I can't, I'm like 40% sure that it was like the Peggy and maybe 30% she said Mike. But I want to say the reason I remember because it was just a very quick, short name, and Peggy didn't sound like a name that a multi-millionaire would have and living in a house like that. And it was weird to me that only a couple and one child own the entire property. In the entire property, I talked about this, it was all in brick walls. The brick walls were like a light tan or white, and when you pulled up, there's a little button you press to even get in, and they used to have a security guard, but you had to have like a code, and then the gates would open up, and then you went into the compound, and it was a very big house. I mean, you walked and it had like a swivel driveway, and the house looked so much different than the architecture and stuff. It was so unusual for me to see this. It looked like these people were loaded. And I want to say I went into the pool house as well, slightly. I think I did. Just a quick stroll, or I think because I started walking around the property just to look at the house by myself. And I walked over to the pool house. I don't think I walked in because it was locked. But I remember looking at it, and it was a 3-bedroom house in itself. Like it was a party pool house in itself, you know, on the property. But I thought I would share this. Now, there's no way to prove, because I worked at Advanced Graphics where I got all these tickets. I talk about that I got over 40 something tickets, and I talked about, and the reason I say is because he gave a crazy look, like he did to me at Advanced Graphics, and he kind of looked kooky. And he, to my understanding, when I worked at Advanced Graphics, now let me tell you, before I get any further, maybe it wasn't him at all. Maybe it wasn't him that owned that property. Maybe it wasn't him at that soccer game. But I want to think it was, and I want to say it was, because I remember that sort of look. Because the way that I observed Mike Standish and how he behaved was very much like this. I mean, it was like a blueprint, just like that. And I remember him just directly looking at me as I was walking across the soccer field, and I was feeling very nervous. And I remember he was trying to scare me or size me up, and he just like pulled at me, and I remember just like getting kind of scared, like what the like I remember sort of getting scared, and I remember feeling that way when I was around this person when I was at Advanced Graphics. Now, when I worked at Advanced Graphics, where I got all these tickets, and I talked about so many videos and how bad shit was happening, and the cutter was involved with Patricia Gadina, and they were stalking me over at a club one day right before my transplant. Well, anyway, I don't know if these videos ever got saved or watched by the correct people, but every person that I ever spoke to said that guy was crazy and he was dangerous and could get lethal people to go after anybody. He had a power over city. He was very powerful as to whatever was going on. He was a very powerful person. I never spoke to him in person, but maybe slightly once or twice. He was very boss driven. When I saw him kind of, going into the different offices and sort of going into sort of places, he definitely didn't seem like he takes shit from nobody. Whether there were other homosexuals or not, he definitely, when I was around the situation. Now, I thought it would make important, you could find this out. I remember he was on that soccer. I remember being scared because I didn't know. I know it sounds like you don't want to hear it, but it was like a murder look, like a fucking just a piercing. And I remember being scared. He was on the bleachers, and I remember just kind of getting scared, and trying to just sort of be tough and stuff and not think about it. But I kind of felt shaken because I don't know who this person is, but he was a younger version of himself. Why? And I never ever recall ever seeing this person ever again. Maybe he did have a daughter or someone that was on a soccer field. Maybe it wasn't him. But he know what he should have known. What this had caused, the amount of attention with meeting Michael Jackson, had caused so much chaos that it was even boggling to me, even right now, to think that, holy shit, there's all these people know, and I'm going to school, Frankie's going to school, and all this other shit's happening. So, if anybody can do the research, this is probably going to be very benefiting. And I thought it would be important. What are those breaking news? I'll find out later, but I figured, who knows? You can only ask my mother and relatives, but as much as crazy stuff is going on, I don't have communication with my mother. It's just my mother's twins, or sister triplets. There's a whole story to awful things that are happening that nobody cares, in my opinion. In my opinion, they absolutely don't give a damn about my life and so much of the circumstances. They're just working it out to their own favors. That's period. But that would be a really, really, really wild. If I find out that $10 million house was his house, his wife's, and that was his daughter, or someone he was related to, and then that was him on that soccer field. Why is this person stalking me and then I'm working over at Advanced Graphics? I remember very distinctly, like I said, when he looked at me and he saw that I kind of got scared, he moved his head and he was just kind of like he like a business person. I mean, if I were to say like a very lethal, dangerous business person, like he had a lot of power over shit, you know, who gets to do what. But I thought it'd be worth talking because I'm not the, you know, investigator, and they're calling all the rules. So whoever, you know, I'm not saying they're calling it, but whoever is, hopefully that helps, or it doesn't. I don't know.